UrbanScience is here to talk about navigating the EV shift. So please welcome to the stage UrbanScience's AdTech Performance Director, Carl Motter. Carl.
Awesome. Thank you. It's great to be here. Like Tanya, I'm a fellow Detroiter, although I bleed maize and blue, not green and white. So I'm trying not to think about the tournament, but we did do all right in football this year, so I have that. But that aside, I am an automotive marketer above I bleed. This isn't advancing. There we go. And one of the things that I really love about the chance to connect, with all of you is that it's a very large industry, but also a very small industry. There are folks here that I've known across multiple lifetimes in my career, and others I'm meeting for the first time. But regardless of which category you might fall into, and if we have the chance to connect, which I hope we do, I love that I really feel like I never have the same conversation twice, because it's always changing. There's always new challenges, there's always new technology. I've been fortunate in my career, the first phase of which I spent on the agency side, which I suspect some of you did as well, and was able to touch on many different facets, from CRM work to display, website, TV, search, social, from national down to very local efforts. And I was able to focus on a lot of different things there. But the interesting thing I think about that world is that your focus is so intense on what you're doing at the time that, somewhat like losing the forest through the trees, you don't always see the macro trends. So having the opportunity to join UrbanScience, which for those of you that don't know is an automotive technology and data company, almost 9 years ago now, was really an opportunity to do that for me. So any agency I was at, any of those roles that I had, I was always focused on a brand, on a certain facet. Whereas UrbanScience, who's been vetted in auto for the better part of 45 years, work across all manufacturers, which was a really, really interesting opportunity, and I was very excited to be able to do that. And one of the great things that UrbanScience has is a really robust treasure trove. We call it our data hub, that allows us to look at phenomenon across all those brands, across the industry. And it gave me the opportunity to reflect, and sometimes differently, on things that I had been really hyper-focused on in my career, kind of like looking back at photos of yourself in high school or college or whatever the case might be. And there are multiple themes that popped up that I think early in my career, everyone was talking about big data. It was really important to do everything that you had to do had to revolve around big data. There was a big focus at one point on viewability and ad fraud, and making sure all your ads were above the fold was a very popular topic. And of course, being data-driven was one of those, and making sure that all of the decisions, all of the optimizations that we're making were driven by data. And more recently, and we've heard others talk about EVs. Myself and my team, I think probably at least 95% of the conversations we have today across industries, across brands, touch EV at some point. And we'll get back to that. But I wanted to talk about being data-driven for a minute, because as I was looking back at some of those trends, one of the ones that jumped out to me is, and we do love our buzzwords in this industry. That was one we used a lot. But when you really think about being data-driven and seeing some of the data that I could, the way at UrbanScience that I couldn't necessarily in some of my other roles, not surprisingly, I think there were some gaps there between were actually using data to inform the initial strategy, or was we're applying the data to optimize on its own against some sort of predetermined notions. And specifically a story that jumped to mind was one that's and it's a common practice. I still see it today, and there's it's still used, and it's revolves around profiling. And in one of my previous roles, it was a job of myself and my team to work with the data planners to help inform their plans, give them the data to pick the right sites and analyze their performance, et cetera. But before we could do any of that, the process always started with a conversation with the strategy and targeting team, which we had a whole team dedicated to this. And we would all meet, because a big part of our strategy was, no matter all the other elements that might be a part of it, we had to support the same core group of vehicles every iteration. And they would meet and they would say, okay, here's who we're going to target for this particular vehicle. And we'd go vehicle by vehicle. And I remember an early example where they presented something like the lady on the left, we'll call her Laura. And they would go through and say, okay, for this vehicle, we're going to target Laura, and she falls into this income bracket, and she's a suburban mom, and she's a heavy social user, but she doesn't post. She's on, they'd go through all of these things, right? And we'd say, okay, and everybody would take notes, and then we would go about our business, and we'd put together this plan, and we would execute it and measure it, and then this process would repeat. And usually we would, about every 9 months, we would revisit it, right? And we would have, okay, so it's time to do the next model year. It's time to do this again. And usually by that time, what we did before was long forgotten. And in this particular instance, it just stuck in my memory for some reason, because we met with this targeting team again, and for the same vehicle, they said, okay, here's who we're going to target for this vehicle, and it was more akin to the guy on the right. We'll call him Todd. And he was they went through the same things, like demographics, the income level, all of those things that we typically think of associated with data layers when we put together a targeting plan. And I just happened to stick out in my mind for some reason, and I went back and pulled up the profile from last year and realized, those are very different targets. And could the ideal purchaser really have changed that much in 9 months? And the reality was no. I mean, certainly there are changes, but we weren't actually looking at who was buying the vehicle. We were looking at, things like the image we wanted associated with that vehicle, or, where we thought we could deliver the most media to promote that vehicle. And then, on the back end of that, we did a really good job of being data-driven and using data layers to execute that strategy. But the point was, we were more driving the data than the data driving what we should have been doing. So the data is only going to do what you tell it. So we put together this plan and we measured it, but it, in retrospect, could have been a lot better. That leads me to thinking about EV, because it's something that really needs to be right-sized, because we're going to talk about some EV stats and some things that we see in the data that we have in a little bit. But it's always changing. You have to think differently when it comes to that data. It's very important, because when we have those conversations that I mentioned with my team, really the questions that we get at their heart kind of go back to that sort of similar thinking of, hey, what do you guys know about EV buyers? Where are they? How do I reach them? How do I target them? And really what they're asking is, give me the formula, give me the button. What data layers do I need to hit EV owners? And you can do that, but the reality is it's a moving target, and it's very dynamic. I had a graduate professor who used to say that by nature, people are cognitive misers, which is really true. And what he meant by that is not that we don't like thinking about things, but by nature we look for heuristics, sometimes even subconsciously, because if you stop and think about it, that if you stopped and thought critically about everything that you encountered on a daily basis, it'd be exhausting. You couldn't do it. So we look for those to help live our lives more efficiently. But when it comes to marketing, it's something we've gotten very used to in terms of targeting and effectiveness around EVs. And it's, the data will show us just something that's you just can't rely on that. We have to do it differently. And we've talked about the time of year and March, and for me personally, it's also an exciting time of year because in addition to an auto marketer, I'm a big baseball fan, and I can't help but think about Moneyball and baseball and opening days around the corner. And there's some similar parallels there if you're not familiar with it, but there's a small market team, the Oakland A's, who's trying to compete with a big market team, the Yankees, and they have to replace players that they can't afford. They don't have the money. So there's a scene where the GM is in a room with his scouts, and they're basically giving him profiles, right? He's like, who can we get? And they're saying, oh, well, using conventional metrics, right? There's like, oh, he's got a good body. This guy's got a good face. The ball's really loud coming off his bat. Look, we got to get guys like that. And he was smart enough to know that we can't do that, and we have to think a little bit differently. So ended up working with some intelligent analysts, and they went back to the data, and they came up with some inefficiencies that helped them find some players they could afford, and actually stayed competitive for a little while. And it's very similar, with EVs. Like, it's not, the data doesn't always, you have to be willing to listen to the data even when it's telling you things that you might not believe on the surface or didn't really expect it to. And an example of this is, one of the knee-jerk reactions when we go to EVs or anything new really is, oh, we got to fill the funnel. How do we do that? Oh, let's build a target. And if you were going to do that, and these are some pretty common data layers that I think a lot of folks would use when they look at, okay, how do I fill that funnel for EV? And you can see on your left, my right, the conventional early adopters. There's some standard income level, certain things like that would, a lot of these data layers would combine. You could build a segment and deliver a lot of reach to that, right? But when we look at the EV data, like who actual EV owners are, at least today, and again, it's changing, but you see the other characteristics, and they're very different. So if you were to build two segments, one against each audience, and run them, there would be a little bit of overlap there, but there's also a lot of differences. So if you just assume, if you go with the heuristic, you're gonna miss. And I think, and another common approach is geo-based, right? And we hear in our discussions a lot of, well, I'm interested in EV. I need to focus attention there, but I really only need to do it maybe in the Northwest or the Northeast, right? Because that's where the EVs are. And certainly there is some clustering there, but the EV market is one of the most dynamic that I've seen in auto. There's more inventory coming to the market from for existing EV models that are out there, and there's new brands or there's new EV models in general being introduced, and you can see a lot of them upstairs. And so when you look at what you see here is a map by county of the US, and you see some hot spots there. And yes, there are some in the Northwest and the Northeast, and it's looking at particularly where is EV more than 15% of the market. And here, okay, so Northwest, Northeast, there's some of that, but you can see it's growing in a lot of places. And one place in particular that was interesting that I want to call out was this area in Texas, because some conventional thinking is that, the data shows that truck owners are very, very loyal to their current trucks and to their ICE trucks. So maybe I don't really need to worry about targeting them. And that's true, but what's also true is that truck owners are also amongst the most likely to add an EV to their garage, right? So you might not get them to switch, but there's a great opportunity to target them to add to their garage, and you wouldn't necessarily think that, I think, on the surface or know that without looking at the data. And so I want to show you an example of something that we actually did in the market, sort of thinking that using this notion of thinking differently and doing what you can to influence the strategy and not letting the data drive you. And we had a client who worked with us. They wanted to produce a luxury SUV EV audience. So we went to our data and we started where, naturally all of you would. Okay, well, who does our data, what does our model tell us from our data set who's in market to buy that exact thing, right? Luxury, SUV, EV. But we didn't stop there. Thinking of it as a sort of an aperture on a camera, we kept expanding it. And we looked at, well, who's in market generally for an EV, whether it's luxury or not? Who's in market for a luxury car, whether it's EV or not? Who's in market for an SUV, whether it fits, the other subcategories or not? Who's in market for the brand, our client's brand in general, right? Because considering, going back to that truck example, just because it was an SUV or they're a current truck owner doesn't mean they wouldn't be in market here. And then finally looking at the competitive set, and particularly when I say competitive set, the people who are buying the models that are competitive to what our clients were, not who they think their competitive set was, but using the data to do it. So putting all those layers together to create a segment that we then ran, and spoiler alert, it worked. We found that it was actually quite powerful, that EVs that when we measured the sales conversion results, mind you, on the back end of this, that they were 5 times, those that we identified in that audience to be in market to buy an EV were 5 times more likely to purchase than those who weren't. It was pretty powerful. So I'm going to leave you with some thoughts. You have to go back to the data. You have to stay ahead. It's challenging. It's hard. But the technology exists today. The data exists today. There are solutions out there to do it, to think differently, to make sure you're staying in tune with the EV trends as the markets grow, as the consumer behavior shifts, because we see them coming from all different kinds of places. But to throw a last baseball reference in there from League of Their Own, it's supposed to be hard. It's the hard that makes it great. If it was easy, everyone would do it. So embrace the challenge. Talk to your agencies, get to your data, stay on top of the trends. Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.